Hey, exams are coming. What's up? It's the Culture Detective here investigating your favorite albums. And today, originally I was gonna do the top 30 best TV shows of the decade list, but I haven't finished the list. So instead, I'm gonna do an album review on the latest Algiers album, There Is No Year. And Algiers is a soul post-punk fusion rock band fronted by Franklin James Fisher, and ever since their sophomore album, The Underside of Power, they had the drummer Matt Tong, who was a monster on the drums. And Algiers had always been one of my favorite bands from the decade, even though they only dropped two albums in the 2010s. Both of these albums are fantastic. We have the self-titled Algiers album in the year 2015, and it is this very dark, grim, dystopian album filled with political suppression. We have tracks like the very slow but grim Blood. We have the frantic hand claps on Black Eunuch, and my favorite track on that album, Irony Utility Pretext, which is this really explosive, intense track. And then in the year 2017, they dropped The Underside of Power, their sophomore album, and it is even better than their debut self-titled album because this album is way more versatile. It has the amazing drums from Matt Tong, and the songwriting itself, it's way more unique, and honestly, it is one of my favorite albums of the decade. Period. Of course, the title track is fantastic. It is one of the best songs of the decade, in my opinion, because it is just so grim and intense. It is the perfect song that describes my high school life. I have selected The Underside of Power, the song, as the theme song to my high school life. It is that good. And we also have Death March, which is almost just as good because it is just so groovy and danceable, yet again, intense and urgent. And then in the year 2020, we have There Is No Year, this album. But before dropping this album, they had dropped a few singles, and at the back end of 2019, they dropped a single called Can the Sub Bass Speak, which is this really weird, odd, freaky, avant-garde jazz slash spoken word track that is very eccentric, very crazy, and it is a very bold and unique artistic direction for Algiers. But of course, everybody knows that their next album, There Is No Year, is not going to be an album full of tracks like this. And instead, we have singles like Dispossession, which is also fantastic in my opinion. We also have Void, which is not so great. And then we have We Can't Be Found, which is released like about a couple weeks ago. And so we have There Is No Year. And unfortunately, this album is not as good as their first two albums. In fact, I don't think this is a great album at all. I think it's just okay. Actually, it's a little underwhelming, a little disappointing, because coming into this album, I had high hopes. I really had high expectations coming into an Algiers album. But basically, on this album, it isn't as versatile as The Underside of Power. Every single track follows a pretty similar formula of the very shouty, angry soul vocals, the muddy, dirty chords, and also on this album, they incorporate a lot of drum machines, like on the self-titled album. And it's a little confusing for me because they have Matt Tong on the drums. Why do they even need drum machines? Matt Tong can just kill a drum beat. And also on this album, it is very electronic, more electronic than their first two albums. We have a lot of distortion and compression. The keyboards and the synths, they're all really distorted and compressed. And honestly, the production is really fine on this album. The production is on point. They are fantastic here. But the songwriting itself, it's not so great, not as appealing to me. And again, this album is not as versatile as their first two projects, which I think is the major reason why I'm not enjoying this album as much. But that being said, the album opener, the title track, is a friggin' banger. It is pure fire, and it is immediately my favorite track on the entire album. It starts off with these squeaking, compressed keyboards, and then these intense beats just slowly creeping up. The vocals by Franklin James Fisher at first is really quiet, but later it builds and builds into the very intense climax, and they're really raw. And on this track, we also get some pummeling pianos, which are just very urgent and tense, and there's just something really unique and fresh about this track that I just absolutely enjoy. And we have lyrics about only to get shot. And we have lyrics like, and it's only to get shot down, and this line is actually being repeated over and over and over again at the end of this track, and it just shows the very grim political suppression and darkness that this album is going to venture into, and I just really enjoy that. In fact, a bulk of the lyrics on this album are inspired by a poem called Misophonia, apparently. And so it's a very dystopian album, lyric-wise anyway. And then we have the second track, Dispossession, and it is a fantastic song. In the year 2019, last year, it is one of my favorite tracks. And right now, I still think it is a pretty fantastic song, even though it isn't as urgent or as infectious or as catchy or as unique as The Underside of Power or Death March or IUP. I still think it's a really fantastic track. Once again, similarly to the title track, we get the shouty soul vocals, and on this track we get some bold pianos and also some really nice backup choir vocals. You can't run away, you can't run away. And yeah, again, it's about political suppression, it's about the world being on fire, it's about not being able to escape from all of this dystopia and everything breaking down. And it's a pretty tragic song, I have to say, but still, I like this track a lot. And then the album sort of goes downhill from here. We have the track Hour of the Furnaces, which of course is about things burning. The city's on fire, the building's on fire, and the beat is way more subtle on this track, but the bass is very thick and dense. Again, the instrumentals on this album, they are actually really well produced. They are thick, they're saturated, but the songwriting on this track, it just feels like a regular, average soul post-punk track that is very grim and sort of messed up, but not much else. It just seems like a pretty average Algiers song, in my opinion. The only thing about this track that really stands out to me is the guitar lick, which is just fantastic. It's bung 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 bung. But other than that, the whole track sounds pretty generic to me. The instrumental breakdown at the end does not help. And then we have the track Losing His Hours, which is this really quiet piano song with a very slow beat. And again, like Hour of the Furnaces, it doesn't sound like a very unique Algiers song at all. It doesn't really appeal to me at all. And then we have the track Unoccupied with its urgent percussion that is very rapid, which is rare on this album, and that's cool. But at the same time, this track is rather stripped back, a little skeletal. The chord progressions, they are a little different than other chords on this album, which is pretty cool. And even though the chorus sounds pretty nice, I still think overall the track is pretty spacey, and there's tension, there's potential energy in this track, but it just doesn't quite get there. So it's kind of stuck at one place. And the lyrics, they sort of talk about love, but I think that maybe it's not necessarily about romantic love, but maybe it's something related to politics, like love to a country or love to one country's political system or society. In my opinion, the next track, Chaka, is one of the highlights on the album as well, and it is this skeletal, groovy, nocturnal jam that feels old school and futuristic at the same time, and it sounds fantastic. The flow of the percussion on this track is incredibly bouncy and fun. The melodies are, of course, more infectious. The keyboards have this really nice, thin texture to them. The drums are intense, and we even get a guitar solo of sorts in the middle of the track, which is really raw and wild, and it is again one of the more unique moments on the album. But immediately afterwards, we are welcomed by, I guess, one of the most underwhelming tracks on the entire album, and that is Wait for the Sound. And throughout the entire duration of the track, it is incredibly quiet. It's nearly nothing. It's very atmospheric, almost ambient, and nothing really happens. And I thought it's going to build up to something climactic, like on the track Hymn for an Average Man on their last album, which has a really beautiful, worrisome climax. But on this track, there isn't really much of a climax. It's pretty anticlimactic. And the song is called Wait for the Sound. So for the entire track, I was waiting for the sound. And the sound never really came. So I am a little disappointed here. And again, we have lyrics about the city being on fire, the streets are on fire, they're raining fire. And once again, with the very dystopian lyrics about the world, the society just crumbling. And I was just hoping for something new, something a little more fresh, maybe. And then we have the track Repeating Night, which has a really nice metallic flavored beat, which is really awesome. The guitar chords on this track are a little warmer and dreamier than other tracks on the album. The melodies are definitely stickier, and with the instrumentals here, it sounds like in the midst of all this grim, depressing dystopia, we have a little bit of hope. We have a little bit of faith, and it sounds amazing. And we also get repeating refrains of "Don't forget that it's us against them," and it's being repeated over and over again. And again, it just makes the track even more worrisome, more grim. And I actually really like that. And then for the next track, We Can't Be Found, also one of the lead-up singles to the album. Sounds kind of similar to Repeating Night, except it's slower and it's a little shyer. Shyer? The verses are a little creepy. They sound shy, they're quiet, and the chorus is rather mystical and dreamy and maybe even a little disorienting and odd. But still, overall, I think the track is really weak. It doesn't have the oomph that I really want from an Algiers song, and I'm just a little disappointed by that. The second last track is called Nothing Bloomed, and it has some pretty amazing cinematic soundscapes, I have to admit, with its painful pianos and dense layers of just atmospheric, almost drones, because on this album, apparently, they have collaborated and teamed up with a producer who also produced Earth albums and Sun albums, which are two drone metal bands, so it isn't a surprise for me to hear some drony atmospheric instrumentals on this album. Except for this track, the songwriting is rather weak and forgettable as well. This track sounds more like a movie soundtrack to a very dystopian, grim movie about the apocalypse, rather an actual song with a solid structure. So I'm not really wowed by this track at all. And for the album ending, we have Void, also one of the lead-up singles to the album. And it's this wild, angry rock rager, similar to Animals on their last album, except this rock rager sounds way more tedious and way more repetitious and redundant, and not much in terms of musical progression. It just sounds like it's getting stuck constantly at one place. And yes, the performances, they're passionate, the vocal work is fantastic, the drums are amazing as well, but I guess musically, the song overall just sounds kind of stale and not as solid, and we get these refrains of "got to find a way, got to find a way," and yes, again, I like the lyrics about, the top 1% of the top 1% enjoying life while the rest of the world is crumbling. But the song overall is just a very anticlimactic ending to the album, in my opinion, and a very weak album ending as well. So yeah, overall, I'm kind of underwhelmed by the latest Algiers album. not as versatile, the songwriting is not as strong, not as sticky, even though the production is amazing. The performances are still there, and the very unique formula of soul and post-punk and the political dystopia, it's still there. It's still there, but I just don't find anything all that refreshing about this album other than the first couple of tracks, I guess. So yeah, my favorite track here is the title track, and my least favorite track here is probably the last track, Void. I am giving Algiers There Is No Year a strong 6 out of 10. Yeah, I guess strong 6. It's a little close to a light 7, but I guess I'm just gonna give it a 6. So, have you listened to the latest Algiers album from 1 to 10? How much did you rate it? Like if you like it, and subscribe if you want more. And thanks for watching. Also, I will be reviewing Poppy, Selena Gomez, Halsey, Mac Miller, maybe Jack Boys very soon.